Okay, this morning I am going to put everyone into one of two categories. I'm going to say that I'm boiling everyone down into one of two types of people. You might be pushing back right now, like, Rhesa, you cannot do that. You cannot just lump everybody into one of two categories, but I'm going to stand by that because in my experience I've seen that we've got the early bird and we've got the night owl. You know what I'm talking about here? We recognize the early birds. Everyone does. But there are probably a few of you here, although you may not be too early bird or you would have been at the early service, right? So the early bird are those people that like pop out of bed 5 minutes before their alarm goes off, and they've probably made a healthy breakfast from scratch and done a run in Central Park. They've checked their Twitter feed, and their inbox is clear all by 7 a.m. And you know those early birds because they all, maybe I shouldn't say all, so many of them have maybe just a little smug sense of superiority. Because you know the early bird has been praised for generations with proverbs like this. Help me out here because I'm sure you know some of these proverbs. The early bird, you got it. Or how about ones like this? Early to bed, early to rise. Someone was taught that proverb as a child, whoever that was back there. Thank you. And I'm assuming that works for women too. And, you know, that last proverb was actually attributed to Benjamin Franklin. But I really kind of like poet Carl Sandburg's take on that poem, which is early to bed and early to rise, and one never meets any prominent people. That, my friend, sounds like New York to me, because we know nothing around here really gets started till 10 p.m. So, you know, I'm kind of lumping everybody into one of these two categories, and I realize that probably this spectrum is somewhere in between. Most of us probably fall somewhere in between. But, you know, it's a good question to ask. Do you know when you get your best rest? Do you pay attention to those rhythms in your life of pushing hard and then pulling back? Or do you just blow right past the signs that say, I am tired and worn out? Now, if you do that, you wouldn't be the only one. How many of you here have heard of the Huffington Post? Do not be ashamed, my friends. I know that all of you have read the Huffington Post. I know that was what it was like this morning. Like people were like, is that okay? They do have news on there. I know we're not all checking out what's going on with the Kardashians. So Ariana Huffington recently wrote a book called Thrive, in which she talks about her experience being seen as a successful businesswoman. And, you know, her startup company, the Huffington Post, was doing really well. And as a result of this, she was getting all these speaking engagements, and she was getting to travel throughout the world. I mean, she was living the dream. And it was at the height of all this activity that one day she was in her office, and she fell and hit her face on the floor and broke her cheekbone. And so she went to the doctors to find out what was wrong with her. What could possibly be, you know, could it be a vitamin deficiency? Could it be some terrible disease? And interestingly, what the doctors told her, what's wrong was the way she was living her life. You see, what she needed was not so much expensive medical treatments or even to quit her job. What she needed more of is rest. Now, these are her words. Is this success? If you're lying in a pool of blood on the floor of your office, you're probably not successful. I don't remember the last time I wasn't tired. Are there a few of you in here maybe you can relate to that? I don't remember the last time I wasn't tired. Now, we are in week 2 of our Theology of series, and today we're talking about rest. When we say the word theology, we're just saying, what does God think about rest? What does God have to say about rest? And I think it's important that we take a look at what God has to say about rest, because we are getting messages all the time from our culture about the pace at which we live our lives. The truth is, Americans are the absolute worst at keeping ourselves busy. And if Americans are bad, you know, New Yorkers are even worse. Because what is New York called? The city that never sleeps. Recently, an article on overwork revealed that Americans have the shortest vacations, the shortest lunch breaks, and the longest work weeks of any developed nation. And as a result, we've got the highest risk of heart disease. Woohoo! Go USA! So other nations, they may smoke, they may drink more, they may eat butter at every meal, but we're the ones who have the highest heart disease because we cannot stop working. We are keeping ourselves busy all the time. If we know that rest is good for us, why don't we do it more? How come we don't celebrate being well rested? We say to someone, how are you doing this week? Like, yeah, I'm doing really good. Everything's in its proper place. Have you ever uttered that? Maybe right after you've come off of vacation, right? Well, again, I think we're picking up cues from our culture about the way we live our lives and the pace at which we live our lives. And you see, rest isn't a priority because so often rest is confused with laziness. Not that long ago, I was listening to an interview of a business person, and I really was interested in this person because they had managed to combine an artistic sense with also a great head for business, and they'd built a national brand around their business. So I was listening, and at one point the interviewer looks at the person and says, how do you accomplish all this? How do you do on this? And the person looks straight at him and says, well, I sleep on average 4 hours a night. Our culture praises the people that are out there working 60 and 70 and 80 hours a week because those are the people that get ahead, right? But then sometimes on the reverse of that, we might start making assumptions about the people who are working 50 hours a week, even 40 hours a week. And so rest, it's not a priority because we've confused rest with laziness. Or sometimes rest isn't a priority because we've incorrectly measured success. You know how it's so easy to measure success by the outward signs. So where someone's working, how large their bank account is, how big their apartment is, the vacations that they take. Those all signal signs of success. So the better someone's lot in life is, well, they must be successful, right? So then it seems like a six-figure salary is a fair trade-off for pushing ourselves to the limit all the time, for burning the candle at both ends, because we have often measured success incorrectly. So rest is not a priority. And I think for us today, it's difficult to rest because we live in a world that is always on. Always, right? It wasn't but a generation ago that sociologists were making the prediction that for your generation, for this generation, the greatest challenge was going to be too much spare time. For real. Any of you guys, your greatest challenge in your day is too much spare time? I think they're a little off on that one, right? Because what's happened with technology, instead of setting us free to have more spare time, it's actually made our lives more complex. So now we're checking our work email at 9 p.m. and we're texting with our coworkers about a project over the weekend. And it makes it hard for us to actually rest because we live in a world that is always on. And rest is tough for us, especially as New Yorkers, because rest, it cannot be rushed. And New Yorkers, we are busy people here. You see it, by the way, the pace at which people live their lives and even the pace that they walk. New Yorkers move fast, and so we want shortcuts. We've got bestsellers on the 4-hour work week. We've got 1-hour photos on every corner, 30-minute meals, 15-minute abs. We want it done fast, fast. And rest, it just doesn't work that way. It's going to require ignoring the urgent for the really important. Now, these are all cultural reasons for why rest is hard for us. These are kind of all of the things that push in on us from the outside that make rest difficult. But I think if we get really honest, there's something inside of us that makes rest difficult. There's something inside that makes it hard to actually sit still and sit in silence and to give space to our lives. And that something is fear. It could be maybe the fear of missing out, of missing an opportunity, fear of not being included, fear of disappointing someone. Or maybe, if we're being really, really honest, we know that if we sit alone with ourselves, it might start to get a little uncomfortable. We might start having to look at ourselves, and we may not like all that we see. So we keep ourselves at a breakneck pace so that we don't have to just stop and sit alone with ourselves. When was the last time you sat in total quiet? I know it's hard for me to do too. Not that long ago, I was out with a friend of mine here at Forefront, and she's made some pretty dramatic changes in her life over the last year, so I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more about that. And so she was telling me about a year ago, she was working 3 jobs. She was trying to make ends meet out all the time, running, going. You know, of course, 2 of those are full-time jobs and one's a part-time job. 2 full-time jobs, 1 part-time job. She was going all the time. And during this time, she thought, you know what? I need to just get away for the weekend. I'm just going to get a little space. So she had a friend who had an upstate home, so she went upstate for the weekend just to get a little bit of quiet. Well, she got a little bit more quiet than she bargained for, because one of those freak spring snowstorms came in. You remember when we were having all that snow? It's hard to remember on a day like this. We had a lot of snow in the spring. And she was up there, and wouldn't you know it, the power goes out. Now, she's in no danger at this point. There's no danger, but the power's out, and she's recognizing, well, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. And just at that point, she picks up her phone and realizes her phone is dead. So now here she is at her getaway where she's going to get a little quiet, and she's getting a lot of quiet. You know, it's fine for an hour. Most of us can deal with it for an hour or so. But, you know, after 2 hours and 3 hours and then a day of quiet, the space started catching up to her, and she realized that all of those feelings that she was able to push aside in all of the busyness of her life, that all came rushing in, and she was face to face with it. And she said, Rhesa, I just started crying. And I cried the whole weekend. But you know what? It ended up being the best thing for her, because she was face to face with her life, the way she was living her life, and the busyness that was slowly strangling her. And she realized, I've got to make some changes. And if you talk to her today, she would point to that weekend of quiet as being pivotal, as being the moment when she realized, I'm going to make changes in my life to live in a more healthy way. Here's the thing for us. It is easier to live our lives busy, rushing from one thing to the next, than it is to actually sit alone with ourselves. Because if we allow space in our lives, we may not like what we see. We may be faced with thoughts like, you know, I don't feel like I know what I'm doing at my job. I feel like a fraud, so I just better put in a lot of hours so that nobody can tell. Or we may be faced with something like, I really feel like I'm lonely so much of the time. This is the way Professor Peter Kreeft describes it. We want to complexify our lives. We don't have to. We want to. We want to be harried and hassled and busy. Unconsciously, we want the very things we complain about. For if we had leisure, we would look at ourselves and listen to our hearts and see the great, big, gaping hole in our hearts and be terrified. You know, it's as if God knew that we would have a hard time resting. It's as if God knew from the very beginning we would have a hard time slowing down. Living a crazy, busy life, it's not just a modern problem. Living a crazy, busy life seems to just be a humanity problem. Because in God's very early dealings with his people, when he is setting aside, this is who I want you to be, this is how I want you to be known as my people, he said rest is important. God desires to call us back from the brink of our crazy busy lives and into rest. God knew how easy it would be for us to get caught up in ourselves and to begin to overestimate our own importance to the running of the world. And the danger we would get into of running ourselves ragged until we're saying, I don't remember the last time I wasn't tired. Rest puts us, ourselves, and our work in its proper place. And this is the beauty of the fourth commandment that God gave his people, saying, this is how you're going to be marked. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. When you're going to be marked apart as different from the rest of the world so that people will know who God is, so that people will recognize me and you, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now, the word Sabbath, it just means to stop or to cease. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Full stop. Whatever you're saying, be quiet. Be present. Let your hands be idle. Stop with the constant consumption of information and ideas and stuff and just be. God desires to give us rest, to set us free. Free from our own busyness, our own self-importance, free to delight both in God, free to delight in creation, free to delight in each other. God is saying rest is important to the way that you live your life. So important that I want you to do it regularly and ritually. Theologian Walter Brueggemann, there's that word theologian again. It just means he talks about God a lot. He says it this way: Sabbath is the cornerstone of faithful freedom. It is an act of resistance. It declares in bodily ways that we will not participate in the anxiety system that pervades our social environment. We will not be defined by busyness and by acquisitiveness and by pursuit of more in either economics or our personal relationships or anywhere else in our lives, because our lives do not consist in commodity. I love that, because I love that the idea of rest, instead of being something passive, is actually an act of resistance. We live in this city that never sleeps. So resting may be the most countercultural and spiritual thing we can do with our lives. Because when we rest in today's society, we are saying we trust in a sovereign God. Psalms 46 says it this way: be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Now, let's not pretend here. It's going to be actually hard to allow to have that extra space in our lives, right? Because, well, first of all, we're not used to it. And it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. It may even look unnecessary. But it's in that space that we find the room to prosper. This psalm says, be still and know I am God. It's when we're still that we recognize some very important truths. First of all, you are not God. I am not God. How about we stop living like it? How about we let go of the burdens that we're never meant to carry in the first place? How about if we let go of the anxiety and the worry and the stress and the things that keep us pushing to the limit? Be still and know that I am God. And it's in that stillness that we actually get to know God. How can we trust God if we do not know God? We need the stillness, the space in our lives so that God can speak to us, that we can be present with God. Be still and know God. Now, that psalm, that verse that we read right there, that's actually the climax of a poem. And I think the beginning of it is important to take a look at, where the psalmist says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. And then he goes to be still and know that I'm God. It's a beautiful, when you feel like the whole world is falling apart, mountains falling, rivers rising, I will be still. It's a beautiful poetic imagery, but I think if we were writing it today for our people, for what it looks like for us, it might sound a little bit more like this. God is the one I turn to for safety and strength. I won't be afraid when I don't know when the next job will come in. I won't be afraid when my plans fail and my dreams are frustrated. I won't be afraid when markets rise and fall. When outcomes seem uncertain, though I feel torn between conflicting demands on my heart and my mind on my time, I will be still and know that you are God. So we have Sabbath and stillness and rest all along. God has been saying to us, trust me. You can trust me. All of those anxieties and worries and cares that you carry with you, you can trust me. You can let go of your constant busyness and turn to me. I love that we get the chance to see how Jesus lived this out. And, you might be tempted to be like, oh yeah, well, of course Jesus. But he didn't have the pressures that we have today, right? Jesus didn't live in our modern, complex society. And it is true, Jesus did not have YouTube with endless cat videos for distraction. And he didn't have Twitter, although I think he really would have killed it on Twitter. But I don't think it would be right to say that Jesus didn't live a pressured life, because when you look at his time in ministry, it's pretty intense. With all the teaching and the traveling and the taking on the religious authorities, spending time with people who were socially outcast, and then he's got this group of disciples he's got to keep in line. And in the midst of all of this, Jesus has got people pressing in on him all the time. Jesus, we need you. We need you. How about over here, Jesus? I've got this person. Will you heal this person? Jesus, we need you. And at the height of all of this busyness and people pressing on him, we read a verse like this. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Now, I know what just happened when I read that verse. There's some early bird person out there who's going, see, Jesus was a morning person. I knew we were morally superior. Actually, I know that because I said that to my husband, who's a night person, and he reminded me Jesus also prayed often at night. So you don't get that. You don't get that, morning people. You see, Jesus got all these people pressing in on him. Here, Jesus, we want you here. We want you here. In fact, right after this verse, we've got the disciples coming after Jesus like, where have you been, man? There's so much to do. We feel like you need to go over here. There's all of this work to do. But Jesus found time to rest. Actually, let's just do away with the found time to rest, because you don't find time to rest in the way you might find a $20 bill on the street, like, woohoo, found some rest. Jesus made time to rest. And because Jesus made time to connect with God, to be present, to be still, and to pray, it helped him and it allowed him to live fully in the mission that he had to accomplish. So the disciples come to him saying, we got to do this, Jesus, we got to do this. And Jesus says, no, we're going to go over here. And this is not the only time we see this in Jesus, where he's got people pressing in on him, crowds wanting to hear, what's he going to say? What's he going to do? And Jesus may teach something spectacular or do something, and then we find out that after all this work, he retreats, either by himself or with his disciples, for solitude and to pray. Jesus knew that that time, that space, allowed him to set the agenda and pace for his work, to renew himself for what he had to do, for the task that was ahead of him. It could have been so easy to veer off course, but that rest was essential so that he could be who God was calling him to be. I think because of that rest, Jesus was able to make some pretty bold claims like this one. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. If you're feeling worn out on life, If you're resonating with, man, I can't remember the last time I wasn't tired, Jesus is saying, come to me, learn from me, learn from my way of life, take my way of life on you, and I will give you rest. When it is so easy to push ourselves to the edge, take it to the limit, burn the candle at both ends, go 24/7 all the time, these are life-giving words. We see in Jesus a life that is fully trusting in God. Resting is an act of trust in a sovereign God. So we may realize the importance and recognize the importance of having rest in our lives. But we also have obstacles to making it a part of our lives. So we might think as we leave here today, what are some practical ways that we can have rest in our lives? I'm going to give you 2 P's. First of all, we'll need to plan to rest. Put it on the calendar. Look, if you're not going to set your agenda for the day, somebody's going to be happy to set your agenda for the day. Whether that's your boss, your coworkers, your spouse, your kids. You're going to have people pressing in on you, needing things. How about you get to your calendar first and plan the times that you're going to rest? Now, when God instituted Sabbath rest, we have the idea of once every 7 days, which is fantastic. I think that's the ultimate rhythm for having rest in our lives. But I know for some of us, it just feels like, I don't know how to get there. That's the best example. How do I get to that? Maybe you're just planning 10 minutes a day, every day at the same time. I'm going to plan 10 minutes of quiet and rest so that I can just be. Maybe you're planning a block of a time at the end of your week or at the beginning of your week. But plan your rest. We talk often here about budgeting our money as a way to honor God with our lives. How about we also take a look at our time? Where does our time go? Can we plan rest as an act of trust in God? We don't want to wait until we get an unexpected snowstorm to knock the power out to rest. And we surely don't want to wait until we're lying on the floor in exhaustion because we've pushed ourselves too hard. Let's make rest a regular part of our lives by planning for it. And I know that can seem really big. How about we also practice rest in small moments of our lives? We talked about this as a staff on teaching team, kind of talking about what are some small ways that we are aware of God's presence in our lives, small ways that we can all be more aware, have more quiet, more space for God to speak. One person said that they're being more present when they eat. All of us here are going to eat lunch at some point. Maybe you plan ahead so that you're eating out of the office and you put your phone aside, turn it off, and just really be present and thankful for what you're eating, paying attention to the food. That might be a way for you to plan rest in your day. Practice looking for rest in small moments. One of our other leaders said that they have made the decision that they are not checking their email until they get into the office. Now, I've heard that a gazillion times, but it took a friend saying that that's what they're practicing for me to be like, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. Why didn't I think of that before? How about we carve out space in either our mornings or our evenings by just turning off the email? Don't check it till you go into the office. Practice space and rest in small ways so that we can be more present to God. And I'll be honest, this is how I'm practicing this lately. I walk my daughter to and from school, and I have to walk a lot of avenues to get her to and from school. We live in a different area than when she goes to school. And I tend to walk like every other New Yorker, which is like, the gates are open and I'm out to the races. That's kind of how I tend to walk everywhere. So I wait till the last minute till I need to get her. And so I'm like, I've got this going, I'm going. And I'm thinking about rest. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Because, every time I come up to the stop sign, I'm looking at the stop sign. I'm looking where it is, how the countdown is going here. How many people are right here so that I can see, somebody else is doing this too. I'm so glad I'm not the only one. I'm totally jockeying for position so that I can get to the front. So then when the light goes, I'm off. Well, if I have 10 seconds, I'm also pulling out my phone, Instagram. Ooh, like that photo? Okay, and I'm off. That's the way I normally approach life in the city. I thought, man, why am I doing that to myself? So in an effort to practice small moments of rest, I'm actually taking those stop signs as literal signs to stop. So when I come up to them, I wait, even if it's the back of the line. And I'm not counting down. Maybe I focus just on breathing, on being grateful for the day. Maybe I might say a prayer like, God, I'm worried about this. I'm turning it over to you. Maybe I just focus on being in the city, being thankful for the city for a time. But I'm taking it as a literal chance to stop in my life and to practice rest in a small way. Now, those are small things, but they are small ways that we chip away at our own sense of self-importance. Can we be the kind of community that encourages each other to rest? We're checking up on each other from time to time, saying, are you resting well? Can we be the kind of community that is so countercultural that in the city that never sleeps, we are a rested people because we trust in a sovereign God? Can that be who we become? I believe we will live much fuller lives, much richer lives if we let go of the need to move constantly and into the rest that God wants to give us. Now, it'd be easy today to kind of okay, good, we talked about rest, and now we're going to go out and we're going to go get brunch, and we're going to be off on our day. But we really actually want to practice this together. So we're going to take a moment, just kind of some quiet and some space to consider those words, Psalm 46, that we read earlier in the message. Be still and know that I am God. We're just going to allow some space to consider what that would look like in our lives, to see what rest would look like in our lives, and to experience rest together. So I'm going to ask if you'll turn your attention to the screen. Let's rest together for a few minutes.